word psychedelic simply refers to a class of chemical, but when we use these chemicals for deep introspective spiritual work, then we can call that psychedelic an entheogen. And a synonym that I like to use sometimes instead of the word entheogen is also a sacred substance. And I can't think of a more appropriate word for using entheogens for looking at our past and looking at our childhood, because I really think that is an extremely sacred thing that each of us can do. And when you're taking a really potent psychedelic, like for instance 5-MeO-DMT, then that has very unanimous sort of experiences between people. There's a lot of commonalities, and people tend to report much of the same thing. But when we explore our past and our childhood and our infancy even, that's an extremely personal topic, and everyone's story is very, very different. There are still some commonalities, but using sacred substances in this way can be a really beautiful way to explore life, to find out who you are, where you came from, and it has so much liberation potential. So, for me, I've had a lot of success over many years exploring this theme, and in particular, just as a suggestion if you want to get started with exploring your childhood, I have found really good success, if you're lucky enough, to look at some objects that you might have had as a small child. And for instance, that little beetle at the start of the video, I don't remember where I got it from as a young child, maybe even 4 or 5 years old. But when I look at it, I have these memories of seeing it as a young infant. And it sort of takes me back to that state of consciousness of just being a wide-eyed baby almost, just taking in information like a sponge. And just looking at an object, many objects, but that one also as an example, it can take you back to the moment or a moment of consciousness that you had when you were just a few years old perhaps. And that can just be insightful because some part of you that was that baby is still alive today, and it's a very deep part of ourselves. Also though, if you want to get started on this topic, music can be a fantastic way to get involved in all of this. And for me, I remember the first time I listened to Tycho, which is a band. I listened to their album called Sunrise Projector. That was so moving to me, and I explored so much childhood themes listening to that album. And I was really brought to tears. I had a bit of a catharsis relating to my parents. And that sort of thing, with the music, it can help stir up the emotional side of our childhood or infancy. And just in general, reminiscing on memories that we have, all sorts of memories, just things that pop up for you naturally. If you do this while on a psychedelic, you might be surprised that you remember things that you haven't thought about in so many years, and they can be really vivid and clear to us even. So I think it's a fantastic thing for you to explore and to find out your own personal backstory really of where you came from as a personality. Because as a baby, we're just sort of a blank slate, a spirit, and over time we develop a personality, and the more consciousness we can sort of have of how we formed, it's just very liberating once again. So what sort of things can we think of? I think it's a good place to start to remember all the joys, those innocent moments that we had as a kid. So for me, for instance, things that come up is playing at the beach. We didn't live near the beach, but when we went, I remember some really great just snippets, visuals, emotions, making sand castles, looking for crabs on the rocks. Those are just little moments, but that joy of a child of pure playing is still within us, and it's worthwhile to get back into contact with that. And for me also, I remember living in Africa, we had a big yard, and I was given access to my dad's tools and some planks of wood and nails and shovels, and I just went crazy playing in the backyard, stirring the imagination. If you have any sort of personal story like that, things you like to do as a child, I think it can be really beautiful to just remember that and get back in touch with this childhood essence. And also, I really love I'm not sure if I mentioned this on the YouTube channel before, but sausage dogs. And the reason why is because we had them as a child. And there are so many beautiful memories I have of sitting in the sun with them, playing with them, having them lick me, showing me love, petting the dogs, running around with them. These really beautiful, pure childhood memories that, are worth remembering. As adults, if we've got the wheels turning, we have goals and ambitions, but it is worthwhile to take the time and just remember what it was like to be a happy child frolicking in the fields. But again, your story will be very personal to you, which is another amazing aspect of all of this. No one can experience this except for you. So also, we can start with remembering all the joys, but at the same time, we are likely to experience, if we sort of let our emotions drift all over the place, where it wants to go, where it feels natural and good to drift, then we are likely to experience perhaps some more difficult emotions, or maybe some moments of a catharsis and of crying, because everyone, I think, almost everyone has some level of trauma associated with their childhood. Unfortunately, some people have a lot more than others. I was very lucky and my childhood was quite clean. But nevertheless, I think all of us go through this phase of starting life, sort of receiving unconditional love. We're just a baby and we receive love. But at some point, we get forced away from our mother, put in school. All of a sudden, there are tests to see how worthy we are. And we have sort of expectations on us of how we need to be and behave. So that whole experience for a little baby infant can be a big learning process, but on some level, slightly traumatic. And as we just explore our memories, we are likely to come into contact with those moments that shaped who we are and put us sort of in our social place. And when this comes up, it can be so beautiful. That's really the word catharsis is the perfect word, where it's so beautiful to see what happened that it brings tears to us, but it's tears of joy, tears of liberation. And with this comes a deep freedom. If you have ever experienced or will experience a catharsis, it's just so self-evident that it's one of the most worthwhile, beautiful things to do in life. And in particular, we can reflect on perhaps moments where we were scared in life as a small child, because it's very natural for children to be scared. And the fear that we have with us today, perhaps all of that comes from moments that we had as a child. And also moments of embarrassment, because, embarrassment for an adult, we can still have issues with it, but for a little infant child, it's such a jarring thing. So if we can remember our moments of embarrassment as a child, we can sort of visually in our minds hug the child, just tell it that it's safe and okay to feel these emotions. And us as an adult, hugging this child, comforting the child, we can almost merge back into the innocence of being this infant and getting back in touch with who we are deeper than these insecurities that we received due to somewhat traumatic events in our lives. But again, your story will be so personal to you, so don't let what I've said here be a box for what your emotions need to be. They can be so complex and intricate, but I'm sure if you use these entheogens in a sacred way, they can be really, really insightful for you. And if we sort of just see all of this through the neutral, accepting eye of consciousness, then I think automatically our brain integrates things really well, and we sort of get a bigger picture of who we are and why we are who we are. It's like we have sort of fragmented memories that we don't usually access, but by going through our life story in deep states of consciousness, perhaps if you're an advanced meditator, you don't even need psychedelics, which would be beautiful, but sort of by feeling our emotions during the childhood, getting in contact with things we haven't thought of in a while, it's like taking these fragments, like pieces of a puzzle, and putting them back together, and we see this much more clear picture of who we are as a holistic whole. And as we start with this process, I think it's natural to sort of go back in time from when we are now And that can involve thinking about high school and then maybe lower school, maybe kindergarten. But it's really common between people who meditate for quite a while that they start to unlock memories that they didn't even know they had of infancy and really, really, really young states of consciousness that we didn't really know we have. Because those memories, they're not clear like memories we have today. If you think about something you did last week, your memory is sort of structured in a certain way. But the memories that you might have as a 2-year-old are going to be very abstract and not really very similar to adult memories. But nevertheless, if you keep going with this process deeper and deeper back in time, remembering things on a more abstract level, we can remember things like the love that we felt in the world at a young age as a baby, the curiosity that we felt, the sense of consciousness first coming online and recognizing that there are other people in the world, recognizing that there's a mother and a father, recognizing there are siblings involved. All of those things, they come online for a baby and we can access them. And I think it is just wonderful to whatever depth we can to remember all of that, because that deep seed of consciousness that was there when we were a baby, in a very real way, that is who we are at a deep level. And by coming back in contact with that, making a union between that consciousness and this one can make us much more happier. And just as an idea for you to find out for yourself, this is also a common theme in mindfulness, and as taught by Shinzen Young, who we are almost at this infant baby consciousness is just a pure fountain of moving energy, expansion and contraction, a fountain of love that's just existing with consciousness. And if we can get back into contact with that as an adult, we can be functioning in the world really, really well, performing a lot of good in society, but constantly be in permanent bliss where all sensations are an expansion and a contraction of the flow of nature. And that's a very good place to live life from. It's a place of living from the kingdom of heaven. And again, we can be so good at serving the world from such a place while living in bliss ourselves.